Hey, good morning, everyone. This is People of Substance by Lemon Skies. I am excited to welcome another guest, Dave Raley, and he's co-founder or co-founder?
Founder, yeah.
Of a company called Imago, and he works with nonprofits. He spends a lot of his time on sustained giving, which we'll get into. And he's also co-host of Purpose and Profit podcast. Definitely subscribe to that. And he does a column on a weekly basis about some of the new things in our space. So lots of exciting things lined up. So please say hi.
Absolutely. Super glad to be here, Olga. You and I have actually kind of circled each other for years now. So the chance to actually connect and be on the show is super exciting.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here. One of the first questions I wanted to ask you, because in our conversations, I've actually not had a chance to go into this. How did you end up working with nonprofits? Was that intentional, or were you an anthropology, psychology guy?
I was I will say I was nonprofit adjacent, right? So I've always cared about causes and, making the world a better place, and just sort of had general altruistic tendencies. But candidly, I was in business school and learning marketing and digital. And in fact, when I was in school, we didn't call it digital. It was the earlier days. We called it web and information technology. And I just wanted to candidly get a job getting out of school, and found out about the fact that there was an entire industry of agencies and providers that actually served nonprofits. And that was the light bulb moment for me, Olga. It was like, wait a second, you mean I could do this like business, marketing, internet stuff, but for causes and get paid to do that? Like, okay, sign me up.
Yeah. So you kind of stuck around.
Yeah. Oh, yep. And I've stuck around for about 20 years now.
Excellent. Next question for you, Dave, is around innovation. And you and I share occasional frustration when innovation becomes chasing shiny objects. So can you talk about innovation and kind of how it fits into organizations and when it's actually meaningful for growth?
Yeah, absolutely. And when by the way, it was maybe a decade or 15 years ago, I had somebody say, Dave, you should, we had an innovation function at the agency that I was at. You should run that. You should run that function. And I said, oh no, like I'll kill innovation was my thought, because yes, we do have that shared just realization that sometimes innovation is just for innovation's sake. But the thing that I realized that caused me to be so passionate about it was just this law of gravity of organizations, in that every organization, every institution, every person goes through this natural life cycle of infancy, early growth, mid growth, slowing, plateauing, and decline. And as far as I can tell, that is just an immutable law. It's like most of the organizations that really see tremendous growth, it's because they have innovated and they've come on the scene with a new model or a new way of doing things. But inevitably, that model needs to be innovated. And I think the mistake that organizations make is they confuse their mission and their model. The truth is the mission likely shouldn't change, but the models over time do need to change with consumer trends, with what's happening in the sector, with what's effective, with what technology is. And so for me, innovation is a means to creating essentially new S-curves, new growth, in order for organizations to accomplish the mission that they're trying to do.
I think sometimes people confuse innovation with something that's really disruptive and at a massive scale. And that's not what you mean when you say innovation.
Yeah, there's this kind of macro innovation, completely new, never, but I think one of the, and I give a talk on this, on the 4 myths of innovation. And one of the myths of innovation I talk about is that the idea that innovation is about ideas, like the breakthrough thinking that never been done before. And the reality is, I think a wise author once said, there is nothing new under the sun. And so it's like, the reality is it's not just about ideas. It's about How do we recombine? How do we understand the context in which we are in order to create? And it does create new things, but it's not just about new. It's not just about the ideas. It's about execution. It's about implementation as well.
Yeah, so it's not a paradigm shift. The one that comes to mind that is like a teeny tiny innovation with pretty massive fallout or positive impact, I should say, when they changed on shampoo bottles, rinse and repeat. And that single word drove up, people would run out of shampoo a lot sooner and they would have to repurchase it much sooner. So it really drove up sales.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's the smallest tweaks.
So let's move on. Speaking of tweaks, or not so tweaky, sustained giving. And that's a topic that I know you've been making a name for yourself in nonprofit space and how we treat sustained giving. And you're so excited about it that you wrote a book about it. The Rise of Sustainable Giving, how subscription economy, how is transforming recurring giving and what nonprofits can do to benefit. Did I get it right?
You nailed it. Yeah, longest subtitle perhaps ever, but got to get the keywords in there. But no, and it's actually very similar to the conversation we've been having, which is the truth is recurring giving's been around for thousands of years. I mean, I've spent I spent 20 years doing recurring giving fundraising, but the last 3 years doing research and interviews and writing this book. And, the earliest examples of recurring, giving date back several thousand years to the ancient Jewish people and the idea of first fruits and the fact that you would give, your first fruits to the priest and then the priest would administer those to the poor and the widows, right? And so the idea of a regular recurring giving relationship is not a new reality. But, and this is the reality of the model of recurring giving and how it's been transformed, is that over the last 10 years, with really the rise of the subscription economy, that has, in North America, I'm speaking specifically about North America, that has completely transformed the way we consume and engage and monetarily exchange value with brands through subscriptions. And we've seen that has transformed now the way donors are thinking about their philanthropic engagement and their giving. And so it's one of those not new recurring giving, but the model is shifting and it's being driven by these other factors. And so I wanted to call attention to that in the book, but then more practically say, okay, well, what does a nonprofit leader do about it?
So when you talk about subscription economy, do you feel like it's driven by changing behavior, or is it driven by changing technology, or is it a combination of the two?
It's changing technology and systems that then ultimately change behavior, and then often the philanthropic impacts down the line. So if we think about another trend, digital giving. So my, in the 20 years I've been doing fundraising, I've probably spent about 18 years doing some version of digital fundraising. And remember, back in the day, my degree was in that, was in not fundraising, but in digital. And I just remember the very early days of when Facebook was this new platform. And I don't know if people can remember this, but in the early days, Facebook was not about, buying stuff. It wasn't about your consumer. It was simply for college students to, connect with each other. And I remember when nonprofit clients would say to me in the early days, hey, this Facebook thing's super cool. Should we use it for fundraising? And the answer back then was no, because it's great for maybe connecting with your volunteers or connecting with your audience, but it's not really a fundraising platform. Well, what happened to Olga then over the subsequent years was people started to get really used to living their consumer lives on Facebook. They started to buy products or be advertised to. And then as that technology started to be perfected, that also led to the change in consumer behavior where people were much more used to opening their wallets, essentially related to their social media profile. Fast forward to, and I think it was the Haiti earthquake in the late 2000s that was the like linchpin moment. And the Haiti earthquake happened. I remember the American Red Cross partnered with Facebook, and they raised, I think it was $30 million in a day. And it was like mind blowing. But if the last basically previous 5 years hadn't happened, where people started to get used to social media and then spending, and then, there was a day when people didn't want to put their credit card in online, right? All those things led up to this seemingly overnight moment of people being willing to give online in droves related to their social media. And we're seeing the same essentially pattern happening with subscription giving. It's been about 10 years of us all getting used to subscriptions in every part of our lives. And now we're seeing nonprofits and charities really taking advantage of that, because donors are consumers and they're ready and they're much more willing and interested in giving on a recurring basis.
Well, and that's a fair point, right? Like, you don't have two separate identities as a donor and as a consumer.
Yep. And we're the cool thing about this book, and when I get to speak at conferences and stuff, is early on, Olga, I've been speaking about this for about a decade. And early on, I'd say, oh, the subscription economy. And people would say, what is that? And I said, well, like Netflix or Amazon Prime. Well, today, I don't have to explain that to anybody. I don't have to, convince anybody that the subscription economy is a real thing. They just look at their own bank statement, right? But the fun thing to me is then drawing the line between, okay, this is a thing on the consumer side, but how is this impacting those same consumers who are donors?
I've heard tales of the olden days where people would receive like little vouchers for monthly donations, and they would like once a month have to mail them in.
My first program that I ever worked on in fundraising when I graduated with that degree was for the Union Rescue Mission, which is the oldest rescue mission in Los Angeles, and then one of the largest rescue missions in the U.S. And I grew up in Southern California, so it was close to home. And the first job I had, Olga, was printing out these fulfillment letters, and 30, 60, 90-day lapsed. We haven't heard from you. Would you please send your check in? And I just remember that being candidly, it was a lot of work, but also really discouraging, because it was maybe single digits percentage of the revenue of the organization. And yet the need was huge. The face of homelessness had changed. People typically at that time thought of the homeless as the old veteran on the street corner kind of a deal. The truth was that the more than half of the guests that Union Rescue Mission was serving were women, children, and families. And so it was like this total disconnect, frustrating situation. And so, candidly, I wrote this book for organizations like that to say, like, hey, this is not 20 years ago. This is now. Things have changed, and you can take advantage of this.
Well, I didn't realize you had such deep ties to Los Angeles. So hopefully everyone is safe and minimal loss. Hopefully.
Yes. Yeah. Prayers for them.
So to go back to your book, so you decided to write this. Did you do an outline? Did you write the whole thing all at once?
How do you write a book, Olga?
That is, Dave. This is
this is my first, so take this with a grain of salt. I honestly spent the first year. I decided almost a year prior to when I wrote my first word. Okay, I need to write a book. Mm-hmm. But then it was kind of like, how do you write? How does one write a book? Mm-hmm. So it took me about 6 months, and then I sat down and I wrote an outline. My mentor, who's written 35 books, was like, it's super easy. You just write an outline, and then you record yourself describing the outline, and then you transcribe that, and you've got a book. Well, unfortunately, Olga, my experience has been harder than that. But so wrote just an outline. Hey, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I know. And this is the thing that held me back, though, was I am intensely focused on making sure to only help. And I was worried that if I, just write down what I know, like, am I going to mislead people? Am I going to miss information that they, need to know that I don't know yet? And I'm writing the book. And so I was in my head about that. And Olga, I had a conversation with a friend. His name's Peter Greer. He's the CEO of Hope International. And he's written, I think he's co-written, I have 14 books at this point. And so I said, Peter, like, when do you know, like, when to start writing words? Like, I'm worried that I'm going to, I don't want to just put more words into the world. I want to put words into the world that are helpful and true, and as true as possible. And he said, Dave, I love Peter because he didn't answer my question. He just asked me a question, which I could learn from. And he said, what percentage of this book, if you had to write it today, what percentage of this book might be invalid or wrong, or, you think that you're going to find out more information? And I thought about it. I was like, I don't know, 5%. Like, I've been doing this for 20 years, I've researched this for a year. So that was the freedom. Literally the next day I started writing words. I wrote the first words of the book, which, by the way, the first sentence in the book is January 1st is the worst day of the year. And I'll let our readers, especially fundraisers, think about that. You've just finished your fiscal year. You've, gotten through December 31st, and January 1st, reset. Let's start all over again. And the good news is, with recurring giving, you don't have to start all over again.
Right. No, I love that analogy. So, where can people get this book if they wanted to purchase it?
Yeah. So Amazon's the easiest, right? But if you want to read more or purchase that directly from us, you can go to sustainablegiving.org. So sustainablegiving.org, that'll forward you to the Imago Consulting site. You can read a little bit more about the book. We've also got some resources there. Blueprint to growing your sustainable giving program. So we pulled out 7 of the key lessons, that are drawing from the book, so that people can get that. And yeah, I'm just so passionate about how we can help the entire sector candidly move forward. That involves the charities, that involves the platforms and the technology and the providers. And so my hope is to get this into as many hands as possible, just to be one of the, I think, flag bearers, for lack of a better term, of like, hey guys, this has been around for a while, but this has changed and we can do something about it.
Yeah. Are you finding, one last question on sustainable giving, are you finding that some causes are just more, they lend themselves more to sustainable giving? And have you encountered any issues that really that's just not for them?
Yeah, one of the challenges with writing the book is I studied 9 different sort of subcategories of charities, and they're all very different. So let me simplify it to really 3 types of charities and 3 types of organizational recurring giving programs. Historically, the first 2 have been like the dominant players in the recurring giving space. So the first one is called one-to-one, which is I give and a beneficiary receives. So child sponsorship's the classic example there. Staff support or missionary sponsorship is another example, where like you're basically pairing up a donor and a beneficiary. Kiva, if you remember, like micro lending, like, oh, I give and so-and-so receives. That's historically been the gold standard of recurring giving. It's personal, it's intimate, there's like a one-to-one connection, but there's a problem, and that is the vast majority of charities can't do that. They have privacy issues, or they just don't, the way their program model is structured, like that just doesn't make sense. The second category of recurring giving historically has been what I call membership, which is much more around donor as beneficiary. So the organization exists to educate or to provide content or to do services, and the donors are at least partially the beneficiary of those services. So think of your local zoo or museum or art institute or public radio, public media content, right? And the beauty of those is there's kind of an actual sort of subscription. There's a value exchange there, right? The donor gives, but they also get discounts on admission, or they get, to consume the content, or their kids or grandkids get to, consume the content. That's awesome. But again, the vast majority of charities don't fit into that category where the donor is the beneficiary. That brings us to our third category, which has been literally everybody else, and that has historically been left behind. And those are your rescue missions, your relief and development agencies, your institutions, just that don't have that donor as beneficiary. They don't have that kind of one-to-one relationship possible. That third, all of these categories, by the way, are impacted by the subscription economy, and I touch on all of them in the book. But it's that third category. I estimated about 75% of all charities in the U.S. today. If you do the math on that, that's 1.1 million nonprofits that have historically been left behind with building recurring giving programs. Those are the ones that are now able to build those recurring giving programs. And that's candidly why one of the main reasons I wrote the book was, how do we shine a light on those 75%, those 3/4 of charities that have been left behind, and say, not anymore.
Well, and spoiler, you don't change your operating model in order to meet this. Like early on, I remember discussions about, well, couldn't we do like child sponsorship, but maybe not quite, or maybe there's no actual specific child, or, and that's just not how this works.
Yeah. No, it's just a tremendous opportunity, but it's going to require thinking differently. And that's why this is innovation, right? If we think about it the same way when I entered the industry 20 years ago, we're going to do it wrong. And so I talk about things like cultivating human connection and articulating your need in, everyone talks about Maslow's hierarchy, the idea of there's these survival, safety, belonging needs, and then we have these more higher level needs. I believe every charity can articulate their recurring giving value proposition in either, and hopefully multiples of these: survival, safety, or belonging. So it's things like that, right? And so we talk about that in the book of like, how do you cultivate an ongoing value proposition? What does that look like?
I love that you brought up Maslow's pyramid. I think that was the very first course I took in college. And I also think of the pyramid, as nonprofits falling along the pyramid, right? Like at the base, kind of the needs like shelter and food and safety. And as we progress, the more challenging to articulate, like fulfillment and actual self-actualization, those are a little bit more abstract. So a little harder to grasp.
Well, and so often charities do just think, well, I'm sorry, we're the higher level ones, so we couldn't possibly articulate our need in survival, safety, and belonging. And I'm like, actually, let's talk, because I think you can. And that's one of the mistakes that some of the more intellectual or, higher level need type of organizations, they think, no, we can't. And it's like, oh, well, you probably actually can. Let's talk about that, because that's just one of the foundational elements of being able to build a resilient program.
So we'll drop the link to the 7 principles just to give everyone some homework on this, because obviously who couldn't benefit from that in our space? And, to kind of turn tables a little bit on a more fun portion of our conversation. So you and I are, we've been sort of orbiting in the same circles, but just getting to know each other. So I wanted to ask you if you could share with me 3 things about Dave that you may not immediately find from your resume or from LinkedIn. Ooh. You can't use your sliced finger.
Yes, if you follow me online, you might have noticed there was a certain thumb incident around the holiday season this past year that involved a mandolin slicer and a potato. We'll leave it at that for our listeners so that nobody has to cringe. But no, we won't use that one.
Don't try this at home, kids.
Don't buy a mandolin slicer is the lesson. So a couple things. One is I'll go with an easy one if you're watching the video version of this podcast, because over my shoulder is a sign that some of you will recognize, and that is the original 1955 Disneyland sign. I am a Disney dad and a Disney adult. Part of that passion is because I grew up in Southern California, but candidly, most of that passion is because I have 2 daughters and a wife, and we love just having experiences, and Disney's so good at creating those experiences. And so that's one that I'm pretty passionate about. And then the other, it's a little more subtle, but shows up in a lot of stuff that I do, is I am a avid photographer. I love, especially landscape type of photography and, you know, architecture. And then I do take a lot of pictures of humans, usually my daughters, you know, on family vacations and stuff like that. But there's just something about being able to, this fits into what I do with innovation, I think, but to be able to see things that most people wouldn't otherwise see. And in a world where we walk around staring at our phones all day long, like we have really lost the ability, I think, to notice things that are around us. And so I feel like my photography helps me just sort of ground myself into actually see a beautiful, not just a beautiful sunset, but a beautiful line on a building, or a field that I wouldn't have otherwise noticed.
Now, is it like a big proper camera, or is it with your phone?
Big proper camera. I cannot. I've tried and I do take a lot of photos with my phone too, but it's just like once you see the quality you can get. No, I'm the guy walking around with the Canon R6, if people care, and the big lens on my hip, just because there's something about being able to really truly kind of capture it as well as possible.
Excellent.
What's a third one? I love to read, which may not be as surprising for somebody who's just written a book, but I only do audiobooks. So I will buy books. I do physically buy books. I have quite the library, but it's usually like the artifact of the book that I really loved that I listened to, and then I buy it. And so my wife, by the way, debates whether or not I can say I've read a book. But if it was on audio, and I'm like, I think that counts.
It absolutely counts. You're absorbing the information. I've had this argument with people. I'm like, I can't. I consumed it.
Yep.
Well, Dave, it's been lovely to have you on here, and I just really appreciate that you're trying to kind of not promote the secret sauce of sustainable giving, but you're really trying to elevate everybody and bring everyone along with you. So that's just wonderful, and so many organizations can benefit from that today. So thank you for taking the time to be here.
Absolutely. It's super, super cool. And I'm really looking forward to just what 2025 and beyond has in store for the sector.
Thank you very much.